Well, I'm Barbara Freeman. I'm an adjunct research professor at Carleton. I taught here for 30 years, teaching radio at first and later going into journalism, history, and theory. I identify now mostly as a media historian. And Kit was my first book and my first big project in media history. I've always tried to focus on women because when I started out in the 80s, there wasn't a whole lot of work being done on women. Kit Coleman was quite a fascinating woman. She was an immigrant to Canada from Ireland. She came in the late 1800s. She was apparently a young widow and came to Canada to make a living because her first husband had died and his family had disinherited her. Kit came from Ireland to Canada, Toronto, and had odd jobs at first, and then started writing short stories for a publication called Saturday Night Magazine. Word got around that she was a good writer, and she was taken on as a women's page editor of the Daily Mail, one of the daily newspapers in Toronto. And she started her career there and worked for 25 years for the Daily Mail, which at one point was merged with the Empire, so it became the Daily Mail and Empire, and did have adventures, travel adventures, the biggest of which was her coverage of the Spanish-American War in Cuba in 1898. Kit is historically significant, especially for the journalism profession, because she was among the first women who was accepted, albeit in a very feminine role, in the newspaper business. So she found her niche on the women's page because being a woman, she couldn't write for the business pages or the sports pages or the hard news pages. But she had a little slot and she made the most of her slot and tried to expand. She had different features in it. She had a big feature, topic of the day, whatever it happened to be. And then she had her letters from her readers. They would ask her all kinds of advice. And she wrote about ordinary, everyday things. She wrote about her travels around the world to England, San Francisco. At times she claimed that she dressed as a man in order to go into certain unsavory places. She would throw in little poems. So it was a mix of things that she had. Her career was unique for its time because she took a very modest little corner of the newspaper and turned it into a big popular feature. She got lots of readers for that newspaper, lots of readers for those advertisers, and she was quite well known. If she were alive today, she'd have a TikTok going, but anyway, she was a big deal. She would be what we would call today an influencer. And she had a huge audience in the Toronto area, but also in other places. People would in those days subscribe to newspapers, not just buy them on the street. So you could get your newspaper in the mail, so you could be living anywhere in Canada and still have access to what she wrote. She preferred to be fairly anonymous in public because she didn't want people recognizing her on the streetcar. She didn't want people hassling her. She didn't want people coming to her place to bug her or coming to the newspaper to bug her or her editor. So she actually liked a certain distance, and that's why she used Kit as a pen name. When her readers were trying to figure out who she was, they became suspicious because she told them a story about how she rode to hounds as a young woman on a horse that was very misbehaving. And she said that she swore at the horse because she got frustrated with it. And so people thought, well, she can't be a woman. No woman, respectable woman, would swear like a man, so she has to be a man. She had a lot of fun with this. The illustrator of the newspaper made drawings, caricatures of different shaped women and men at different ages with the caption, "Which is Kit?" And so, she had this humor. Well, her readers really wanted to know who she was and what she was like and what she looked like. And so she told one of her readers that she was, and I quote, "a very plain, middle-aged woman, plain brown eyes, not deep or long-lashed, brown hair slightly mixed with gray, nondescript sort of nose, wide mouth with tired lines at the corners, average complexion, rather red, average figure, ugly hands and feet." There. How did you like that picture? You would have it, you know. So the reason she's significant is because, first of all, she was one of the first. Secondly, she was the first North American woman to be an accredited war correspondent. And she started with her friends, the Canadian Women's Press Club, which in those days had to be separate from the main press club because women were not allowed there, so they started their own. And she was its first president, just because she persevered for all this time and, in journalism. So we call her a pioneer. She was a pioneer. She was looked up to by all the young journalists. They would come to Women's Press Club gatherings and sit at her feet and listen to her stories, and she would encourage them to keep going with their women's pages, to keep going with their short story writing, to write their novels if they wanted to, whatever they wanted to do, but she felt that women had a right to make a living. She believed in equal pay. And part of the reason for that was she knew what it was like to suddenly be thrown out of a relatively comfortable financial existence and have to rely on herself. Her determination to do well as a journalist had a domino effect, first of all, on the women around her, on especially the young women around her. They all aspired to be like Kit. They kind of idolized her, many of them. And they, in turn, had careers. And so the numbers of women in journalism slowly grew. It became somewhat stagnant and contained mostly, not always, but mostly to the women's pages until the late 1960s, early 70s, when women, and that's my generation, were finally allowed into the newsrooms as a cohort. We didn't have too many role models, and she was one of mine. She did it in her way then, we can do it in our way now. And now if you look around you, there are many women in journalism. I think in some ways her experience was universal in that for people who came to Canada knew it's always a struggle, and it was a struggle for her, but she was very brave. It's a testament to her courage. It's a testament to her adventuresome spirit. It's a testament to her skill as a writer. And it's just nice to have a coin with a woman's image on it as well, and it looks like her. The face of the woman sitting at the desk, that is Kit, looks like Kit. And it shows the coin, her journey from Ireland, her travels, her writing with her pen and notebook, which is exactly how she wrote. The typewriter came later, but it's also important and it's there. And that image of her just writing at her desk is great, because that's exactly who she was and what she did. One of the people who helped build this country, even in her own modest way in the newspaper industry, and helped build the newspaper industry and open it up for women.